At the sound of the bell, it's breakfast time.
Breakfast.
Oh, welcome back. Beater readers, huh? Sometimes they're more beater than reader. All right, we're going to begin with a comic that I'm actually embarrassed to admit that I didn't really know all that much about until a few years ago. What could that be? Why, it's Herbie from the American Comics Group. Now, somehow, this book has always managed to fly below my radar. What can I say? I guess I've never met any rabid Herbie fans, and I didn't really know enough to seek it out on my own. As far as I knew, this was just one of those books that I was aware of secondhand. I thought it was a mere footnote in the comics medium. Boy, was I wrong. Now, I'm no expert. I only have a few of these, and I couldn't tell you where the other ones are, but if Herbie 6 here is any indication, then I need to build this entire run. This book is one huge piss take. Its irreverence and grimly sardonic nature dovetails with my own cynicism and suspicion of the self-important decision-makers who impose their short-sightedness and stupidity on society's free thinkers. In a world of punch-drunk lunkheads and status-backed sociopaths, Herbie is the hero that we need. But don't take my word for it. We have a comic to read. In A Caveman Named Herbie, we catch up with our hero in class, taking issue with his teacher's description of cavemen as stupid. In Herbie's estimation, cavemen were doing all right for themselves, but old Mrs. Marleybone ain't hearing it and expects a report or something. Herbie heads home to enjoy Christmas recess, but it's not to be. Turns out Dad is dragging him along on a business trip to Hollywood, where he has a big lumber deal cooking. And while those closest to him consider Herbie a big fat nothing, it turns out everyone in Hollywood not only knows who he is, but is in awe of his love-making prowess. Unfortunately, Herbie ruins his dad's lumber deal by insulting one of the studio's biggest stars, and now has two problems to sort out, both of the prehistoric variety. Utilizing one of his specialized lollipops, Herbie travels back to caveman days to find a hirsute but otherwise together caveman to make his case. And hey, here's one now. This is Bum Bum. But sadly, he's the uncooperative type, so Herbie has to look elsewhere. After more prehistoric hijinks, we meet Ticklepuss, Bum Bum's kid sister, who's taken a liking to old Herbie here. She courts him in the customary manner of her people, but Herbie still has work to do. First, he whisks Bum Bum back to the 20th century, where he educates the head of the movie studio what a real Neanderthal should look like, before proving to Miss Marleybone that she's underestimated their intellectual capacity as well. Herbie is redeemed, Bum Bum and Marleybone find love, but something still eats at our young hero. In Space Age Herbie, Dad's latest harebrained scheme is to become a balloon magnate. Hey, why not? Of course, he whizzes it down his leg, and it's up to Herbie to save his bacon. He lands a job working for an eccentric scientist who has discovered a planet, even though it's already fully populated. Using the scientist's sophisticated equipment, Herbie manages to get a look at the planet's surface and is stunned to discover the object of the natives' reverence, an enormous lollipop. Herbie makes a beeline for Planet Percival, encountering a pesky cab driver, some aggressive critters, and, abruptly, the most terrifying child I have ever seen. Seriously, I don't know what Ogden Whitney was on, but remind me to keep clear of it. Horrifyingly enough, all of this planet's residents are upsized overbiters, or still, they use their magic lollipops to get stupid and float around, a huge waste in Herbie's eyes. Our boy Bob Sagard snags all the lollies and heads back to Earth just in time to save his dad's ass again. Now, I can't say that this was a book that I was planning on reviewing. To be honest, I didn't even realize I had it in my collection until stumbling across it. That said, with Herbie, I feel as though I've come across a kindred spirit. While some folks might be put off by this book's silliness or general idiosyncrasies, I have to say that I loved it. It's great stuff from the American comics group Dick Hughes and Ogden Whitney. Moving on. If you grew up in the 1970s, then you doubtlessly drooled over ads for Heroes World. Originally an American comic book distributor going by the name Superhero Enterprises, the company was run by Ivan Schneider, head of licensing for Marvel Comics in the early 1970s. Eventually, Marvel discontinued their mail-order service, and Schneider bought it and renamed it Superhero Enterprises. And while it was a grand name, the truth was Snyder ran the operation out of his basement. A storefront was eventually rented, and, with its success, a second store soon followed. By 1982, the company, now known as Heroes World, had 12 stores and advertised frequently in the very comic books that were the source of its origin. And that's where I come in. As a kid, I couldn't believe that such a place as Heroes World existed. I'd never been outside of my own little neighborhood, and we certainly didn't have anything like it. We kids bought our comics at the 5 and Dime or the grocery store. The idea that there was an entire store devoted to toys, books, and games featuring the comic book characters we loved seemed as believable as, well, the comic book characters that we loved. However, unlike that example, we kids were given proof of our Shangri-La in the form of the Heroes World catalog. Now, unlike other catalogs at the time, the Heroes World catalog was illustrated. Now, this might seem like an odd choice today, but it was a better option than the grainy and oftentimes illegible photo reproductions seen in comics. To raise the bar, Snyder produced the catalog in conjunction with the Joe Kubert School of Art. This particular issue features work from up-and-coming creators like Rick Vedich, Steve Bissette, and Tom Truman. Let's get into it. While Superman seems nonplussed, I find these marionettes pretty weird. I've never seen them before in the wild, but here are a few pics for the morbidly curious. While the likenesses aren't bad, the bolts through the head are pretty upsetting. They look like neck injury victims. Next we have some roleplay items, and everybody gets a utility belt. Even the Hulk, for some reason. I guess you don't want to make him any angrier? Maybe that's why Batman and Spidey let him be part of their biker gang. And speaking of bikers, dig this wicked illustration of the Ghost Rider stunt cycle. I had this thing when I was 10, and I thought it was the coolest toy ever. It even had a switchable Johnny Blaze head. Here's a glorious 2-page ad for Kenner's Star Wars toys. If there was one thing that I learned from comics growing up, was that drawing Darth Vader was hard. And clearly I wasn't alone in the struggle. Still, it's nice to remember a time when every aspect of the property wasn't micromanaged into the ground. Almost embarrassingly, an ad for Battlestar Galactica appears next. Even Snyderman is having a hard time looking enthused for these. That said, Doom's exuberance more than makes up for it in this ad for Spider-Man's Web of Terror. So what the heck is it? It's just a Hot Wheels set branded with Marvel characters, nothing nearly as glutinous as the ad would suggest. Next up, the ever-present ad for Mego Superheroes. Snyder must have had a basement full of these. As a kid, I was crazy about these little guys. In fact, I'm still pretty fond of them. Mego also produced 12-inch Kiss dolls, which I always thought were silly. Even as a kid, I didn't buy their plastic clothes and ridiculous hair. I'm not talking about the dolls, I mean the actual band. Speaking of bigger Migos, I was too old for these by the time the cool magnetic Batman and Robin were released. I remember being struck by how much nicer the head sculpts were than the original 8-inch figures. Hey kid, you want to kill Superman? Seems counterproductive from a merchandising standpoint, but hey, think again, Bunky. Next up, I can honestly say that I had this Spider-Man bed set as a kid, and I can just as honestly say it was made out of the most uncomfortable synthetic fabric I have ever encountered. Think a hair shirt for monks, only it's 8 feet long. The artwork was cool, at least. The same cannot be said for the Spidey bouncing ball, which is just so wrong. Snyderman, wherever you are, you've got a lot of explaining to do. Next up, the Badger. What can I say? This comic caught me at just the right time. I was coming off of Marvel's Secret Wars and DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths, and I was overloaded by the big events and was looking for something cleaner, clearer. My local comic shop was huge when it came to this, although no one popped out of the woodwork to suggest titles like Dan Clo's Lloyd Llewellyn or Evan Dorkin's Milk and Cheese to me. I found them nonetheless, honing in on them through the process of, hey, this doesn't look like it sucks. The Badger and his colorful cast of characters were the creations of Mike Barron. The Badger character first appeared in his own title published by Capitol Comics for 4 issues in 1983. This was a surprising show of faith for an untested property, but Capitol clearly had confidence in Barron's unlikely hero. Sadly, things didn't work out. Capitol ceased publishing comics in 1984, and Barron moved his property over to First Comics. And that's where I come in. Again. I had missed the first 4 issues of The Badger, but I was ready when number 5 hit. The action picked up where 4 left off, but there was a helpful recap for kids like me who got to the party late. It was here that I got my first look at the Badger in action, providing a much-needed beatdown to some clowns in a park. Unlike your typical hero, the Badger possessed no superpowers per se. His abilities lay in his military experience, his years of martial arts training, and his inexplicable ability to talk to animals. Wisconsin's most notorious superhero, the Badger, a.k.a. Army veteran Norbert Sykes, is arrested, found unfit to stand trial, and conferred to Nakoma Hospital. In time, Norbert slips into a catatonic state, his Badger identity subsumed into a stable of alternate personalities created from a lifetime of abuse and trauma. While in the hospital, Norbert comes in contact with Ham, the weather wizard, a 5th century druid awake again after a 1,500-year-long coma. Norbert agrees to work for Ham, and the old wizard uses his magic to free them. With his recently acquired wealth, the result of a bewitched lottery ticket, Ham buys a castle in the countryside and begins to build an infrastructure to establish him in the exciting new world of 1983. As our story begins, Ham has discovered the location of the Rowan tree, an ancient oak of great mystical power. His offers to purchase the real estate the tree is located on are rebuffed, so Ham decides to go directly to the source of his problems, faceless 1980s corporate behemoth Capco. Unsurprisingly, in spite of his erudite arguments, the druid is shown the door. Now a thorn in the company's side, it's decided to send Ham a message in the form of 4 mercenaries hired to shake him into submission. However, in spite of their fancy gear and weapons, the one thing they didn't prepare for is the badger. Thanks to Mike Barron's writing and Bill Reinhold's fluid line work, the badger was unlike any comic I'd experienced before. Sure, I'd seen characters that were war vets or martial arts experts or unhinged social crusaders, but, well, none of those things all at once. Unlike utterly unfallible comics veterans like Nick Fury, Norbert's time in the war didn't make him into an unstoppable engine of democratic will, but instead the shell of a human being clinging to childhood psychosis for release. There is a directness to Barron's storytelling, an immediacy that reached me then and now. And while younger me didn't always get some of the more subtle points of Mike's writing, I was locked in when it came to the exploration and development of the Badger character. This wasn't someone removed from the reader by fantasy origin. There were no exploding home planets or spider bites. Barron's narrative dared us to relate to a volatile, violent character whose suffering wasn't limited to a one-time dose of cosmic rays, but instead a series of very real and relatable circumstances. By the early 1980s, it seemed as though we'd turned a corner, that things simply weren't as black and white as we'd thought. Perhaps the world needed a hero who wouldn't stop at, "I'm sorry." The Badger seemed to exist to make sure those foolish enough to break society's unwritten codes never did so again, at least without looking over a hyperextended shoulder. And while the character's origin would be fleshed out and developed in the ensuing years, at the time, Norbert's Badger persona seemed to be nature's wrath personified, if the Lorax had been given Malaysian butterfly knives instead of flowery words. Would this fly today? Of course not. It didn't fly then, and that's what makes it worth remembering. You can reprint Spider-Man's first meeting with Venom until the cows come home, and it's not going to matter. In spite of that character's anti-hero, allegedly homicidal tendencies, the alien symbiote simply can't hold a candle to a single human freak wandering around Wisconsin in spandex. Thanks for joining us, Larry. If you enjoyed this particular program, or other programs on the network, please consider supporting us at the link below. For the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Network, I'm Jason Mink. I hope to see you next week at breakfast.